Yellowstone National Park, a place of breathtaking beauty, but also unforgiving danger. In the summer of 2012, a young couple set out for a camping trip, Michael and Sarah Thompson, a husband and his pregnant wife ever to be seen again. Their disappearance became one of the most baffling mysteries in park history. Were they attacked? Did they run away? Or did the wilderness itself claim them? 11 years later, a lone hiker stumbled upon something deep in the forest that would finally reveal the haunting truth of what happened to them and the shocking secret they carried. In the summer of 2012, Michael and Sarah Thompson, a young couple from Denver, decided to take a camping trip in Yellowstone National Park. Sarah was 7 months pregnant with their first child, and the couple saw this getaway as one last adventure before stepping into parenthood. They set up camp near a secluded spot by Shoshone Lake, away from the usual tourist crowds. Friends later said they were in high spirits, posting photos of sunsets, waterfalls, and their glowing happiness. But 2 days later, they vanished without a trace. When rangers came across their abandoned campsite, it was chilling. Their tent was zipped shut. Their backpacks were inside. Michael's car was still parked nearby. Yet Michael and Sarah were gone. Search and rescue operations lasted weeks. Helicopters scanned the forests, cadaver dogs combed the trails, and divers searched the lake. Nothing was found. It was as though the earth had swallowed them whole. The case went cold for 11 years. Theories swirled. They fall victim to a wild animal attack. Did they get lost in the wilderness, or was foul play involved? Sarah's parents always believed someone had harmed them, pointing to Michael's secret financial troubles that surfaced later. Then, in the summer of 2023, a hiker named Daniel Reed stumbled upon something deep in the woods, nearly 15 miles off any trail. Beneath the roots of a toppled tree, he found fragments of a weathered backpack. Inside were personal items, a rusted camera, Sarah's wedding ring, and baby clothes still folded. Nearby, skeletal remains were scattered. Forensic testing confirmed they belonged to Michael and Sarah, but the most shocking discovery was that the remains included tiny, infant bones, meaning Sarah had given birth before dying. The evidence suggested they had gotten lost, wandered into dangerous terrain, and survived for days. Sarah delivered the baby, but without supplies or rescue. All three perished in the wilderness. The tragedy stunned the public. After 11 years of mystery, the truth was both heartbreaking and haunting. Their story became a reminder of both the beauty and danger of nature and the thin line between adventure and disaster. Introduction to the case. In the summer of 2012, Yellowstone National Park was alive with the sounds of rushing rivers, rustling trees, and the constant shuffle of tourists exploring America's most famous wilderness. Among the many visitors who arrived that June were Michael and Sarah Thompson, a young married couple from Denver, Colorado. To anyone watching them, they seemed like the picture of happiness, married for just 3 years, excited about their future and awaiting the arrival of their first child. Sarah, glowing with motherhood, was 7 months pregnant at the time. Friends described her as adventurous, someone who never let limitations hold her back. Even with a baby on the way, she insisted that she and Michael take one last trip together, what she lovingly called their farewell adventure before parenthood. For her, the trip wasn't just about camping. It was about creating memories with the man she loved before their world transformed into diapers and sleepless nights. Michael, on the other hand, was practical yet deeply supportive of Sarah's adventurous spirit. He made sure their car was packed with all the essentials camping gear, hiking boots, a first aid kit, food supplies, and even a small camera to capture their journey. Friends later recalled how he often posted scenic pictures on social media. And this trip was no exception. Their last uploads showed campfires under starlit skies and Sarah laughing while standing near a waterfall, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly. When they first set up their campsite near Shoshone Lake, it looked like a dream. The tent was perfectly placed with a view of the water, surrounded by tall pines that whispered in the wind. They cooked simple meals, shared stories, and enjoyed the silence of nature. Yellowstone, for them, was more than a destination. Was a sanctuary, a chance to step away from the noise of the city and into the heart of untamed beauty. Family members back home in Denver had no reason to worry. Michael texted his brother the first night, saying everything was going smoothly. Sarah even called her mother, laughing as she described how Michael struggled to start a fire before finally succeeding. Those small conversations became the last, reassurances their loved ones would ever hear. The couple had planned a 3-day stay. They wanted to hike, take photographs, and enjoy the solitude before returning home. Sarah was scheduled for a doctor's appointment the following week, so their timeline seemed safe. Nothing about their trip suggested risk or danger, at least not on the surface. What made their disappearance so chilling later was how normal everything seemed. No arguments, no suspicious behavior, no hints of running away or hiding. Just a couple who loved each other and were preparing to welcome a child into the world. They were not thrill seekers looking for danger. They were simply young and optimistic, believing they had planned a safe and memorable getaway by the second day of their trip. However, no one outside the park had contact with them. At first, no one noticed. After all, camping trips often meant limited cell service. But when days passed without Sarah checking in, her family grew uneasy. She was the type to stay connected, especially given her condition. Concern began to spread when neither she nor Michael returned home as scheduled. When park rangers were alerted and went to check their campsite, what they found would fuel years of mystery. Michael's car was parked right where he left it. Their tent was still standing, zipped neatly as if untouched. Inside were backpacks, clothing, and half-used food supplies. It was as though the Thompsons had simply walked away from their lives, leaving everything behind. That eerie discovery marked the beginning of one of Yellowstone's most haunting mysteries. What happened to Michael, Sarah, and their unborn child? How could two people, one heavily pregnant, vanish into the wilderness without a single sign of struggle, attack, or escape? This was the puzzle investigators would spend years trying to solve. As friends, family, and strangers alike became captivated by the case of the missing couple, the last known moments of Michael and Sarah Thompson's lives began like any other camping day in Yellowstone, beautiful, serene, and filled with promise. According to their digital footprint, the couple was active on social media during their first 2 days in the park. Michael uploaded a short video of Sarah sitting on a log near their campfire, smiling softly as sparks danced into the night sky. That video, time-stamped June 17, 2012, would later be studied endlessly as the final moving image of them alive. Tourists who passed through the nearby trails recalled briefly seeing the couple. One hiker said Sarah looked radiant but tired, moving slowly as she held her belly. Another remembered Michael's protective stance, always walking slightly ahead of his wife, as though shielding her from any harm. These fleeting encounters were unremarkable at the time, but years later, They would become precious fragments of evidence. On the second evening, the couple was believed to have prepared dinner at their campsite. Remnants of charred wood, scattered food wrappers, and a pot still resting by the fire pit all pointed to a quiet meal together. Investigators later remarked how ordinary everything looked: no overturned chairs, no signs of panic, and no indication that they had been rushed or attacked. Their final communications added to the mystery. Michael's phone log showed an outgoing call to his brother that never connected, possibly due to weak reception in the park. Sarah, on the other hand, drafted, but never sent a message to her mother, reading, "We might try hiking a bit further tomorrow if I'm up for it." That unsent text would later be seen as one of the last glimpses into their mindset, calm, casual, and far from fearful as evening fell. Yellowstone's wilderness transformed. What seemed enchanting in the daylight became far more menacing. Under darkness, coyotes howled in the distance, the air turned cold, and the forest seemed alive with unseen movement. Yet Michael and Sarah had camped before. To them, these were the natural rhythms of the wild. Nothing to fear. Several campers reported faint voices and laughter echoing across the lake that same night. While no one could confirm it was the Thompsons, the timing matched when they were last believed to be active. If true, it meant that even hours before their disappearance, they were in good spirits, unaware of what awaited them. By the next morning, something had shifted. They were not seen leaving the area, nor were there footprints suggesting a hasty departure. Their supplies remained untouched, suggesting they hadn't planned to hike far. And yet, by the time rangers visited the site 2 days later, the couple had simply vanished. The last physical evidence investigators clung to was Michael's camera. Inside the damaged device, retrieved years later, were half a dozen photos. From that final evening, images of Sarah standing near the lake, Michael grinning as he tried to cook over the fire, and one blurred picture of the tree line snapped as if by accident. That final image, unclear and unsettling, sparked endless theories. Family and friends, the disappearance was impossible to comprehend. How could two people, especially a woman heavily pregnant, leave behind their belongings and vanish into the wilderness without leaving even a trail of footprints? Some insisted there must have been foul play, while others believed they may have gotten lost in the darkness after venturing too far. Those last known moments, the laughter by the fire, the half-written text, the blurry photo would remain haunting snapshots of a mystery unsolved for over a decade. They painted a picture of peace and happiness, abruptly interrupted by something no one could see, hear, or predict. The line between safety and tragedy was crossed in silence, leaving behind only questions that would echo for years. The discovery of the abandoned camp when the Thompsons failed to return home on schedule, family members immediately grew uneasy. Sarah's pregnancy meant she rarely went more than a day without calling her mother, and Michael's brother insisted it was unlike him to ignore messages. Concern turned to alarm when repeated calls went straight to voicemail. It was then that Sarah's parents contacted Yellowstone authorities, triggering the first official welfare check at the couple's campsite on June 21, 2012. 3 park rangers set out to locate the missing couple. Using the campsite registration logs, they traced the Thompsons to their reserved spot near Shoshone Lake. What they encountered would later be described as both eerie and deeply unsettling, because the camp looked almost untouched, as though frozen in time. Michael's car was still parked neatly in the designated lot, locked and undisturbed. The keys were not inside, suggesting he had them on his person. To investigators, this meant the couple had likely walked away voluntarily, not under immediate duress. But the strange part was that nothing in or around the vehicle indicated they had prepared for a long trip away from camp. Their tents stood upright, zipped tightly from the outside. Inside, rangers found sleeping bags unrolled, partially packed backpacks, and even Sarah's pillow. Food supplies were laid out neatly, some of them unopened. It looked like the couple had been planning to return soon, yet they never did. On the picnic table outside, investigators noticed small personal items: Sarah's paperback novel, her sunglasses, and an unfinished cup of tea that had long gone cold. Michael's watch rested on a folded map, its hands still ticking when it was found. These were not things a couple would willingly abandon if they intended to vanish for good. What baffled the search team most was the lack of disturbance. There were no torn tents, no overturned chairs, no paw prints from wild animals. It wasn't the scene of a bear attack or sudden panic. Instead, it looked as though the couple had simply stepped out for a short walk and never returned. Rangers extended their search to the shoreline, hoping to find footprints in the sand. They discovered faint impressions that could have belonged to Michael and Sarah, leading toward a narrow trail. But just a few yards later, the tracks vanished into harder ground, swallowed by the wilderness. That single thread was not enough to follow. When news of the discovery reached the family, despair set in. Sarah's mother refused to believe they had simply wandered off. She was pregnant, 7 months pregnant, she reminded investigators. There's no way she just left her things behind. Something happened. Yet without signs of struggle, foul play could not be immediately proven. The abandoned campsite quickly became a focal point of national attention. News outlets reported the haunting details: the tent still zipped, the car still parked, the belongings untouched. Journalists described it as a ghost camp, an image that would haunt readers and viewers across the country. The eerie stillness suggested not just a disappearance, but an unfinished story. From that moment on, the campsite became ground zero for a massive search operation. But in those first days, before the helicopters, dogs, and divers arrived, one fact stood out above all others. Michael and Sarah had vanished without taking the very things they needed to survive. That chilling realization set the tone for what would become one of Yellowstone's most perplexing mysteries. The massive search operations, the moment the abandoned campsite was discovered. Yellowstone authorities wasted no time launching one of the largest search efforts in the park's recent history. With Sarah being 7 months pregnant, time was of the essence. Rangers knew that if the couple had gotten lost or injured, survival chances would decline rapidly, especially with a baby on the way. Within 24 hours, the operation had expanded across Shoshone Lake and the surrounding trails. Helicopters circled overhead, scanning the dense forest canopy for any movement, while ground teams combed through brush, calling out Michael and Sarah's names. The forest, however, answered with silence, as if the wilderness had swallowed their voices whole. Cadaver dogs were brought in to pick up scent trails from clothing found at the campsite. For brief moments, the dogs seemed to catch something, pulling handlers along winding paths. But just as quickly, the trail would vanish into streams or rocky terrain, frustrating the search crews. It was as if the Thompsons had stepped into thin air. Divers entered the icy waters of Shoshone Lake, probing the depths with sonar equipment. The lake's reputation for deadly cold currents and hidden drop-offs fueled fears that the couple might have drowned. Yet after days of exhausting dives, nothing surfaced: no bodies, no clothing, no equipment. The lake guarded its secrets tightly. The search wasn't limited to professionals alone. Dozens of volunteers, local hikers, other campers, and even off-duty rangers joined in, forming human chains to sweep across fields and forests. Some carried flashlights into the night, convinced they might spot a faint glow of a campfire or hear cries for help. But night after night, they returned empty-handed. Media coverage intensified as the days stretched into weeks. News helicopters hovered, journalists camped near ranger stations, and reporters broadcast live updates across the nation. The public became emotionally invested in the plight of the missing young couple and their unborn child, turning the case into a symbol of mystery and heartbreak. Despite the massive effort, every lead collapsed into disappointment. A reported sighting of a couple matching their description near Old Faithful turned out to be tourists from another state. A backpack spotted near a river was unrelated. Even thermal drones, deployed in hopes of detecting heat signatures in the woods, failed to produce results. As the weeks dragged on, the mood of the search teams shifted. At first, there had been optimism that Michael and Sarah were simply lost and would soon be found. But as days passed without food, water, or shelter, hope gave way to grim resignation. "We stopped calling it a rescue mission," one ranger later admitted. "It became a recovery mission." Yet even recovery proved impossible. No bodies, no torn clothing, no clear signs of animal activity. The absence of evidence was baffling. Experienced rangers, familiar with accidents and attacks in the park, confessed they had never encountered a case so completely devoid of clues. It was as if the forest had conspired to erase every trace of the Thompsons. By late summer, the official search was scaled back. Helicopters were grounded, volunteers were released, and only a small skeleton crew of rangers continued occasional sweeps of the area. The once booming search camps grew quiet. The wilderness of Yellowstone had won the battle of endurance. Leaving behind a chilling reality, Michael and Sarah Thompson had vanished, and no one knew how or why. The theories that emerged when the official search for Michael and Sarah Thompson slowed, theories began to fill the silence. The absence of evidence left room for speculation, and soon everyone from investigators to journalists to armchair detectives online was trying to solve the puzzle. How could a healthy young man, a pregnant woman, and their unborn child disappear, without leaving behind even a scrap of evidence? The most immediate theory was a wild animal attack. Yellowstone is home to bears, wolves, and mountain lions, predators fully capable of harming humans. But rangers found no signs of blood, torn clothing, or drag marks at the campsite. Animal attacks leave behind chaos, and in this case, everything was eerily undisturbed. While possible, experts quietly dismissed this explanation. Another possibility was drowning in Shoshone Lake. The lake is notorious for its deadly waters. Colder than ice, even in summer, with dangerous currents that can trap swimmers. Perhaps the couple had gone for a walk or tried to cool off by the shore and slipped into the water. Yet divers scoured the lake repeatedly with sonar and cameras, finding nothing. For two adults to drown without leaving behind any trace struck investigators as unlikely. Then came the murder-suicide theory, a darker possibility. Some speculated that Michael, under secret financial stress, may have harmed Sarah and himself. But family and friends strongly rejected this idea, pointing to Michael's devotion and Sarah's excitement about becoming a mother. Moreover, there was no evidence of weapons, violence, or a planned disappearance. Others leaned toward the idea of a random crime. Yellowstone draws thousands of visitors every year, and the vast wilderness could easily conceal foul play. Could a stranger have attacked the couple, forced them away, and hidden their bodies? The problem with this theory was simple. No one reported suspicious activity, no screams were heard, and no stolen items were identified. The voluntary disappearance theory also surfaced. Some suggested Michael and Sarah staged their vanishing to start a new life somewhere else. But this clashed with reality. Sarah was heavily pregnant. They left behind all essentials, and there was no evidence of bank withdrawals, tickets, or travel plans. Walking away from everything in their condition seemed almost impossible. Among the more unusual ideas were supernatural theories whispered by amateur sleuths. Yellowstone has long been a source of folklore stories of haunted woods, cursed lands, and people who walk into the forest never to be seen again. Online forums buzzed with claims that the Thompsons had fallen victim to something paranormal, though such ideas held no weight with investigators. Another debated angle was domestic tension hidden beneath the surface. After months of digging, investigators discovered Michael had been facing quiet financial troubles, including unpaid debts. Did stress play a role in their disappearance? While suspicious, this alone could not explain how both he and Sarah vanished without a trace. Perhaps the most unsettling theory was human abduction. Yellowstone covers millions of acres of untamed land, much of it unmonitored. Some suggested that someone familiar with the park could have intercepted the couple, leading them away and ensuring they were never found. But without footprints, signs of struggle, or stolen belongings, even this remains speculation. In the end, the theories piled up like unanswered questions. Each seemed plausible at first glance, but every one fell apart under closer scrutiny. The missing couple had become a riddle with no solution, a mystery that haunted investigators, family, and the public alike. Until evidence surfaced, all anyone could do was wonder what had really happened on that summer night in Yellowstone. The family's struggles for answers for Sarah's parents, the days after her disappearance, were unbearable. Her mother, Linda, had been counting down the weeks until she would hold her first grandchild. Instead, she now found herself staring at the news, listening to strangers speculate about her daughter's fate. Every time the phone rang, I prayed it would be Sarah, Linda later said, but it never was. Michael's family struggled. In their own way, his younger brother, James, had been the last person Michael tried to call before vanishing. For years, James carried the weight of that missed connection, replaying what might have happened if the call had gone through. What if he was trying to tell me something? What if I could have saved them? He asked reporters in a trembling voice. The families clung to every update from Yellowstone authorities. When helicopters searched the skies, they watched live coverage with bated breath. When divers explored Shoshone Lake, they sat by the phone, waiting for a ranger's call. Each day ended the same with no answers, no relief, just a hollow emptiness that deepened with time. Rumors and theories circulating in the media only worsened their pain. Some outlets painted Michael as a man under stress, hinting at foul play. Others speculated that Sarah had been reckless for camping while pregnant. For the families, these narratives felt cruel, shifting blame onto the victims rather than focusing on the search for truth. Linda kept Sarah's nursery untouched, the crib still made, the tiny clothes still folded. Every time she entered the room, she broke down, imagining the life her daughter and grandchild were supposed to live. I still talk to her, she admitted in an interview years later. I tell her I love her, and I ask her to come home." Michael's father, Richard, grew frustrated with authorities. He believed not enough resources were used in the first weeks, when rescue was still possible. He wrote letters to state officials, demanding that the case remain open, insisting that somewhere out there, answers still existed. His determination became a driving force in keeping the case alive in the public eye. The families often gathered at candlelight vigils held in Denver, where friends and neighbors prayed for the couple's safe return. Photos of Sarah's glowing pregnancy and Michael's proud smile were displayed on posters, turning them into symbols of hope and loss. Each vigil ended with the same words, "We will not stop searching." As the years stretched on, hope began to fracture. Some family members quietly admitted they no longer believed the couple was alive. Others refused to accept that possibility, clinging to the idea that Sarah and Michael had somehow survived, perhaps hidden, waiting to be found. This divide sometimes caused tension, but all shared the same pain. What haunted them most was the lack of closure. Without bodies, graves, or definitive answers, grief had no ending. Birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays became unbearable reminders of absence. Sarah's due date came and went, leaving her mother in tears, imagining the baby that never had a chance. For 11 years, the Thompsons' families lived in limbo caught between hope and despair, love and loss. Each unanswered question was a wound that refused to heal. The disappearance wasn't just a tragedy of the wilderness. It was a life sentence of uncertainty for those left behind, a constant ache that only truth could silence. The breakthrough discovery for more than a decade, the case of Michael and Sarah Thompson, lingered in the shadows of Yellowstone's unsolved mysteries. Families had all but given up on answers, investigators had moved on to new cases, and the world had slowly forgotten. But in the summer of 2023, an ordinary hike turned into an extraordinary revelation, one that would change everything. Daniel Reed, a 34-year-old hiker from Montana, had ventured deep into Yellowstone on a solo trek. Unlike most tourists who stuck to marked trails, Daniel preferred the challenge of exploring isolated routes. On a humid July afternoon, he found himself nearly 15 miles off any established path, navigating through fallen trees and dense underbrush. As he stopped to rest, Daniel noticed something unusual beneath the exposed roots of a massive toppled pine tree. Wedged in the soil was a faded scrap of fabric, dirty but distinct. At first, he thought it was trash left behind by careless campers, but when he pulled it free, he realized it was part of a weathered backpack. Inside the deteriorated pack were personal items that stopped Daniel colder, rusted camera, a silver wedding band, and baby clothes so small they could only belong to an unborn child's layette. The sight was chilling. Daniel knew instantly this wasn't just lost property. It was a clue to something far darker, shaken but alert. Daniel marked the location on his GPS and immediately alerted rangers. Within hours, a specialized recovery team arrived at the site. What they uncovered nearby would stun investigators. Remains scattered in a shallow depression, partly covered by earth and debris, as though hidden by time itself. Initial inspection revealed at least 2 adult skeletons, their bones weathered but intact. Forensic experts carefully gathered the remains, while investigators catalogued the belongings. Sarah's ring, still recognizable despite corrosion, and Michael's watch, its hands frozen in place. But it was the presence of tiny, fragile bones, among them that turned tragedy into heartbreak. The discovery of infant remains meant Sarah had given birth before dying. For years, everyone believed she was still pregnant when she vanished, but the evidence told a different story. She had delivered her baby in the wilderness, far from hospitals and safety, and both mother and child had perished together. Forensic testing confirmed the identities of the adult remains as Michael and Sarah. DNA verified the infant as their child. The baby that should have been born in a hospital crib but instead came into the world in the middle of the forest. The revelation was devastating not only for the family but also for investigators who had spent years haunted by the unanswered case. The scene suggested a grim but natural outcome. With no signs of violence, the theory emerged that Michael and Sarah had become lost or trapped, forced to survive with dwindling resources. Sarah went into labor, and Michael stayed with her until the end. Without medical help, supplies, or rescue, all three lives were claimed by the wilderness. The breakthrough discovery did not end the sorrow, but it ended the silence. After 11 years of unanswered questions, the forest finally gave back the Thompsons. What Daniel Reed stumbled upon that summer day was not just a backpack, but the truth buried beneath earth, roots, and the passing of time. The shocking infant remains when the recovery team confirmed that the tiny bones found near Michael and Sarah belonged to an infant. The entire investigation shifted. For years, the missing couple had been spoken of as two lives lost. Now it became clear that there were three. Sarah had not just vanished. Pregnancy had given birth in the unforgiving wild, far from doctors, family, and safety. The infant remains were fragile, barely preserved, but unmistakable. Forensic experts handled them with the greatest care, whispering to one another as though afraid to disturb the silence that clung to the site. Two seasoned investigators who had seen countless tragedies. This discovery was different. It wasn't just evidence, it was innocence cut short. For Sarah's family, the revelation was almost too much to bear. Her mother had dreamed of holding her first grandchild, rocking the baby in the nursery Sarah had lovingly prepared. Instead, she now had to face the truth that the child had been born in a wilderness that offered no comfort, no protection, and no chance of survival. Michael's father wept openly when investigators explained what they had found. He had always defended his son against rumors of foul play, and now the evidence vindicated him. Michael had stayed with Sarah until the end, facing the unimaginable alongside her. Yet the heartbreak lay in knowing that he had been powerless to save either his wife or his newborn child. Forensic examination suggested the baby had lived, at least briefly. Tiny remains of fabric, believed to be swaddling cloth from the backpack, hinted that Sarah had prepared for this moment despite the dire circumstances. This detail painted a haunting picture. Even as her strength faded, she tried to be a mother, giving her baby love in the darkest of hours. The discovery also fueled haunting questions. Did Michael go searching for help, only to collapse from exhaustion? Did Sarah cradle her newborn as she waited for rescue that never came? Investigators could not answer these questions, but the possibilities alone were enough to torment the families and haunt the minds of all who followed the case. The press seized on the revelation, calling it one of the most heartbreaking discoveries in Yellowstone's history. Headlines screamed of a baby born in the wilderness and a family lost together. The story that had once been about a vanished couple now became a chilling tale of survival, birth, and loss in the most isolated of places. For the public, the detail of the baby transformed the case from mystery to tragedy. People could imagine getting lost in the woods, running out of supplies, even succumbing to the elements, but a child being born and perishing alongside its parents struck a deeper chord. It was a reminder of life's fragility and the merciless indifference of nature. Sarah's mother later admitted that this revelation brought her nightmares. She would wake in the night, imagining her daughter in pain, struggling to deliver her child, and holding it close as both slipped away. "No mother should ever have to picture that," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "But that's the only image I have left." The shocking infant remains were not just a discovery. They were the heartbreaking truth that closed the circle of the Thompsons' disappearance. The mystery was no longer about where they had gone, it was about how, in their final moments, they became a family of three, only to vanish together into the wilderness that would not release them for 11 long years. The forensic findings: the remains of Michael, Sarah, and their infant were recovered. They were carefully transported to a forensic lab in Montana for analysis. For investigators who had spent 11 years with unanswered questions, this was the moment they had been waiting for. Science would finally speak where speculation had failed. The skeletons of Michael and Sarah were examined first. Their bones bore no signs of blunt force trauma, sharp injuries, or gunshot wounds. This immediately ruled out theories of foul play or animal attack. What investigators found instead was evidence consistent with exposure and exhaustion. Hallmarks of individuals who had succumbed to the wilderness rather than violence. Michael's remains showed signs of stress fractures in his feet and shins, suggesting he had traveled extensively over rough terrain before death. Experts believed he may have been searching desperately for a way out of the woods or for help for Sarah, covering miles until his body simply gave out. Sarah's bones told a different but equally harrowing story. Subtle markings on her pelvis confirmed that she had gone through childbirth. This revelation aligned with the presence of infant remains at the site. The forensic team concluded that she had delivered her baby in the wilderness, with only Michael by her side, an act both heroic and tragic. The infant remains, fragile and small, revealed no signs of trauma. This suggested the newborn died from natural causes related to exposure, lack of warmth, food, or medical care. In the wilderness, without shelter or supplies, survival would have been impossible for a newborn. Forensic experts also tested soil and plant matter found within and around the remains. Microscopic traces indicated that the Thompsons had survived for several days after leaving their campsite. The couple had not vanished instantly. They endured, struggled, and held on as long as they could before nature overcame them. Items retrieved from the backpack added further weight to this theory. The rusted camera contained images from their final days, Sarah resting against a log, Michael's face gaunt with exhaustion, and one haunting image of a newborn wrapped in cloth. Though blurred and partially corrupted, the images provided a visual testimony of their last moments. Investigators pieced together a likely scenario. The couple became disoriented while exploring off-trail, lost their bearings, and ran out of supplies. Sarah went into labor under these dire conditions, and Michael did everything he could to care for her and the baby. But with no rescue in sight, exhaustion and exposure claimed them all. The lack of external injuries supported this theory, as did the arrangement of the remains. Michael's bones were found just a short distance from Sarah's, suggesting he never left her side for long. To investigators, it painted a heartbreaking picture of loyalty and love in the face of impossible odds. The forensic findings closed the door on years of speculation. There had been no murder, no animal attack, no staged disappearance. Instead, the truth was raw and merciless. The Thompsons had died not because of foul play, but because the wilderness offered no mercy. Science had finally answered what mystery had long obscured, yet the answers only deepened the sorrow. The lessons from the tragedy, the Thompson family story, is not just one of loss, it is a mirror held up to every traveler, every hiker, and every person who steps into the unknown. Yellowstone, with its majestic peaks and breathtaking valleys, is a place of wonder, but it is also a place of unforgiving dangers. Their tragedy reminds us that beauty and peril often live side by side. At its core, the case speaks to the fragility of human life in the face of nature's raw power. No matter how strong, young, or prepared we think we are, the wilderness operates on its own terms. It does not bend to human will, and it does not pause for compassion. Michael and Sarah's fate shows how quickly wonder can turn to disaster. There is also a profound lesson about preparation. Though the Thompsons had packed gear and supplies, the evidence suggests they strayed from marked trails and overestimated their ability to navigate unfamiliar terrain. Many experts say that one wrong turn in Yellowstone can be the difference between life and death. This tragedy underscores the importance of caution, planning, and respect for the unknown. For families who followed the story, the most haunting lesson was about the bonds of love. Michael never abandoned Sarah, and Sarah, even in her weakest state, fought to bring her child into the world. Their story became not only one of loss, but also of loyalty, sacrifice, and unbreakable commitment in the face of despair. On another level, their deaths challenge us to reflect on the unpredictability of life. A young couple with dreams of raising a family and building a future together instead became symbols of wilderness tragedy. It is a sobering reminder that tomorrow is never promised, and that life can change in an instant. The discovery of their remains also sparked important conversations about search and rescue efforts in national parks. Critics argued that the initial search might not have been extensive enough, while others pointed out that Yellowstone's vastness makes it nearly impossible to cover every square mile. Still, the tragedy raised awareness of the need for improved technology and resources to prevent similar losses. For hikers and adventurers, the lesson is both practical and spiritual. Practically, it reminds us to never underestimate the land, always carry proper maps, emergency beacons, and supplies. Spiritually, it teaches us to honor the wilderness as something larger than ourselves, something that commands humility and respect. The story also lingers as a cultural cautionary tale. It is told not just as a news report, but as a reminder to future generations about the thin line between adventure and danger. Every retelling carries the same quiet warning: do not take life, love, or safety for granted. Perhaps the deepest lesson comes from the presence of the infant, that small life, born into hardship and gone too soon, embodies both the hope and fragility of human existence. Even in tragedy, there was creation, a new life that, though brief, forever changed the meaning of the story.